The film opens with a corporal guarding a military camp at night. He takes his phone out and calls his girlfriend to show her a mysterious girl standing outside the gates. After some time, she turns around with a crying face and pretends to be in danger, claiming someone to be after her. The guard gets puzzled by this situation, so he contacts his sergeant through the comm and asks for a possible direction on this situation. In a very dubious voice, he tells the guard to let the girl in. Hence, the guard opens the gates and takes the girl inside their security office. There, the guard calls his girlfriend once again and faces the camera toward the girl, who's standing in the corner. He cuts his call with his girlfriend when his sergeant contacts him and asks why he is not doing the gate duty as he was asked. The guard tries to jog his sergeant's memory about him allowing the girl in, but the sergeant denies having ever claimed such a thing. This is when the guard realizes he's been tricked by a demonic spirit. When he tries to go near the girl, another spirit dressed in red attacks him and takes his life. The scene then shifts to Tommy, a young boy who is composing the ending part of the Corporal Guard and the Intruder Spirit blog to be posted on a website called The Haunting Hour. Subsequently, Tommy goes to fix the ceiling lamp and plays the voicemail of his mother, telling him to look after himself and do his chores on time since she's gone to another town in Japan to visit her aunt. He returns to his computer to write another blog and comes across a lifeless butterfly resting on his table. Finding it fascinating, Tommy photographs the butterfly and posts it as his profile picture on the horror website. After seeing requests for new stories in the comment section, Tommy composes another story in which a first batch of army recruits was sent to a forest to dig trenches. The recruits discover the corpse of a Japanese fugitive which has not been decomposed at all. While some believe he's been buried since the World War, some disagree with this assumption, believing that the corpse would have decomposed by now if it had been buried since then. This brings the recruits to a mutual understanding of burying the corpse since it could be anything sinister. They return to their instructed tasks, not knowing they've already awakened the evil into this world. The story shifts dynamics, showing comedic aspects along the way. A corporal is shown digging graves along with his entire platoon, in a very whimsical and funny manner. He keeps whining about working under a cowardly sergeant's supervision and serving the army without charging a commission. Unbeknownst to him, his sergeant is standing right behind him, listening to all the horrible things he's been saying about him. Eventually, the sergeant commands him to open his mouth widely. When the corporal opens his mouth, he aggressively spits in it, making the fugitive throw up. The crazy sergeant finds him moving without his permission disrespectful, and gets his fellows to bury him as a punishment. His fellows bury his entire body but leave his head out for breathing. Then, the dim-witted sergeant orders them to cover his head too. One of the fellows hesitantly picks up the shovel and starts putting soil over his face. Meanwhile, the other fellow finds it immoral and starts removing the soil from the buried corporal's face. The sergeant rages out and punishes the trio to dig each other's graves and bury one another. After this, the trio runs out of patience and flees into the forest. However, the more they try to find their way out, the more they astray. After walking in circles and running away from their sergeant for hours, the trio comes across a small hut in the middle of the jungle. Desperate for a human company, they let themselves in the hut. However, when they don't find anyone there, they decide to drink some water to quench their thirst and leave. On their way out, one of the fugitives notices a Malaysian girl peeping from a door behind them. When they get closer to the door, the little girl unleashes herself on one of them and nearly chokes him to his demise. One of them places a paper with some holy verses written on it, believing the girl to be some evil spirit. That's when the little girl realizes they're actual humans. She reveals that there is a demon that lurks in these woods wearing a Japanese army uniform just the same as theirs, which is why she thought of them as demons too. The little girl says that the demon slaughtered her husband and most of the villagers who lived in these woods, leaving her behind all by herself. Before she can describe the demon further, she feels the demon's presence and runs back into her room. She tells the soldiers to hide before the demon finds them and slays them too. The men try to come after the girl, but she locks herself up. The boys run upstairs to a room where two of them hide inside a cupboard and one hides under the bed. Soon, the demon appears and enters the room. One recruit, who's hiding under the bed, gets a glimpse of the demon's boots and places a hand around his mouth to prevent himself from screaming in dread. After taking a look around, the demon disappears from that room. One of the soldiers hiding in the closet peeps out to see if the demon has gone. Much to his shock, the demon's horribly decayed and bandaged face appears right in front of him outside the closet. It also tries to open their closet, but the two boys hold the handles from inside to prevent the demon from opening. Soon, they feel the pressure on the handles and the closet being lifted off. They take a breath in relief, but their fear reaches its peak when the demon penetrates the closet with his sword. The two give up on their life as the demon keeps puncturing the closet. Somehow, the guy hiding under the bed opens up the closet and tells the boys to immediately run away. In fear, the two soldiers run for their lives like they've never run before. As they run back into the woods, they find their third partner sitting under a tree with a pale face and his guts emptied out from his stomach. As they approach him to take a closer look, the pale soldier smiles and attacks them. The scene goes back into the real world, where Tommy is seen getting negative comments on the current fugitive story. A commenter requests Tommy to write anything other than the Japanese fugitive, and another user comments to alert Tommy about not composing horror stories, especially in these months. Just as he's processing these thoughts, a girl messages him, complimenting his horror blogs. Upon opening the message, he finds the profile picture of the girl attractive, so he goes through her public profile where she has put on a lot of beautiful pictures. For some reason, Tommy steals one picture and edits himself into it, making it look like the two are a couple. As he edits the picture with his poor skills, the water glass next to him tragically spills on his arm. While drying his arm with tissue paper, Tommy sniffs his arm and realizes the water smells like it came from the underworld. Ignoring this event, he opens Facebook and makes a fake ID by the name Mia. He posts his edited pictures with the stranger girl and also sets up the relationship status, which shows that Mia is in a relationship with Tommy. Soon, he starts sending texts to Mia's ID, believing her to be his real girlfriend. He describes himself as a saint who gets praised by his platoon commander and everyone else in the platoon. In reality, he is the opposite of how he describes himself in Mia's DMs. He gets shouted at by his platoon commander for not performing well enough. He gets beaten up by the bullies of his platoon at night often. One day, the bullies spot him sending messages to Mia. They forcefully snatch his phone and read his chats. The main bully is dumb enough to believe that Tommy is in a relationship with a girl this beautiful. While he tries to bully Tommy into spilling the truth if Mia is his girl or not, the nerdy sidekick quickly points out that Tommy has edited him in the picture with Mia, because he can see Tommy's shadow and not the girl's. When Tommy tries to defend himself, insisting Mia is his real girlfriend, the main bully forces him to call Mia to prove himself. He aggressively gives Tommy his phone back and forces him to make the call. Much to everyone's surprise, Tommy receives a call from an unknown number at the exact moment he's being forced to call Mia. Upon picking up the call, he hears the cries of a woman. The main bully snatches the phone from Tommy and tries to talk to the person on the other end, but all he hears is a woman screaming at the top of her lungs. Hearing the scream catches him off guard and the phone slips from the bully's hands. It falls on the floor and gets cracked. Soon, a senior officer shows up and calls the entire platoon outside for training. Everyone else except Tommy leaves the room. He tries to turn his cracked up phone back on, but it doesn't work. At night, while everyone's sleeping, Tommy tries to turn his phone on once again, but to no avail. All of a sudden, smelly water starts dripping down on him from the ceiling. When he looks up, his phone turns on by itself and a message notification pops up, coming from the same number that called earlier. He texts back and finds out it's the same girl whose photo he stole to make a fake social media profile. Then the ghost of the evil girl, the one Tommy often mentions in his stories, is seen standing behind his bed. Tommy doesn't suspect anything amiss, so he chats with the girl back and forth. However, when Tommy asks her to be his friend, the messages stop. He keeps waiting for a reply, and he even takes the phone to the bathroom with him. He finally gets a text back from the girl, expressing how lonely she is. When Tommy reciprocates this message, the girl starts talking about his stories and refers to them as morbid. She expresses not liking such disturbing stories, because there is always an option to spend their lives beautifully. Eager to meet up with the girl, Tommy asks to see her since he's returning home on vacation. However, instead of getting a reply, the smelly water starts flowing inside the bathroom stall he's currently in. In the water, he sees the reflection of the evil girl whom he often writes about in his stories. He immediately opens the door, expecting to see the girl, but he only finds a hair strand floating in the smelly water. That night, he becomes highly suspicious and waits to get back home the next day, only to find on his computer that the girl who texted him on that horror site doesn't exist. He searches for her ID, but he doesn't find any. He tries to call the number several times, but he hears weird distortion instead of the dial tone every time. Driven by his ignorant nature, he doesn't solve this mystery and gets back to composing another one of his horror blogs. His horror story starts with a commando team being taught the art of skinning a snake in the middle of a dense forest by their platoon sergeant. Once the sergeant removes the skin from the snake, he orders one of the commandos to cut it into 9 pieces, so everyone can have a piece for dinner. While some are grossed out and some refuse to eat a snake due to religious purposes, the sergeant taunts them in a very comedic manner. He hypes up his platoon by claiming that eating the snake would make them stronger. That night, while everyone's sleeping in their tents, a snake slithers inside the sergeant's pants and bites him. Instead of screaming in pain, the sergeant enjoys it and doesn't talk to anyone about it, indicating something is fishy. The next day, he wakes up, has a word with his commandos, and goes back to his tent where he excitedly peeks inside his army bag. Soon, the commandos return to their Singapore camp on a national holiday, after 3 weeks of hard training in the humid and hot forest. Their camp already has very few cadets in it, so when the chief clerk Mam Chu finds out one of the commandos passed away in the jungle, she scolds the sergeant for not reporting back to the camp. Strangely, the sergeant possessively holds his army bag closer to his chest and doesn't let anyone touch it. Suddenly, a weird movement occurs in the bag and Sergeant is pushed toward Chu and is forced to hug her even though he doesn't want to. He becomes awkward and quickly goes back to his room. Meanwhile, Chu flatters herself, thinking that Sergeant Insik has a crush on her. Now, Sergeant Insik is shown opening the bag in his room. Suddenly, a woman comes out of the bag with her entire body covered in scales and her lower half looking like a snake's tail. The woman hypnotizes the sergeant and gets closer to him. Subsequently, the sergeant's screams are heard in the corridor outside his room. In the next scene, the Indian cadet visits Chu's assistant and hands him the skin of the snake they devoured back in the jungle. He asks him to pay him for getting his job done. He becomes joyful seeing the skin and expresses that it is going to bring luck to his life and increase his chances of getting a girlfriend. Soon, the Indian boy leaves the assistant because he receives a call from the lab. The assistant ends up making fun of Chu on the phone, which she overhears. Chu immediately takes the phone's receiver from him, scolds the lab people to send her reports today, and hangs up on them. She then scolds her assistant for talking behind her back and punishes him by making him clean the ladies' bathroom. Now, alone in the office, Chu has a breakdown while recalling the things she overheard her assistant talking about. Unbeknownst to her, the snake woman crawls to her office and takes possession of her body. Meanwhile, her assistant goes into the bathroom and takes off his clothes so he can begin cleaning, as he's only wearing his red briefs. The snake woman enters the bathroom wearing Chu's clothes. The snake woman sees the snake skin on the table right next to the assistant. She then comes closer to him and starts seducing him by giving him a lap dance. Meanwhile, a commander named Desmond hears the moaning sounds from Chu's office while he's patrolling the camp. Upon opening the door, he is grossed out to see Chu throwing herself at the assistant and making weird faces. Desmond shuts the door and walks past the office while ignoring the screams of the assistant. Later, the snake woman shows up in the men's bathroom and targets the Indian dude while he's showering. Coincidentally, Desmond catches that scene too, and he is grossed out seeing Chu making seductive faces and sticking her tongue out, whereas on the contrary, the Indian dude is seeing a hot young woman wearing Chu's clothes. Later that day, a cadet enters the storage unit to store some boxes. Suddenly, he finds a trail of blood and gunk which leads to the corpses of Sergeant, the assistant, and the Indian dude. Screaming and shouting, the cadet runs out of the storage unit and alerts his superior, a bald soldier. He notes the seriousness of the situation and calls a special department which is run by an old man. The old man is known for performing exorcism and keeping in touch with the spirit world, so they invite him over to their camp to see what has been going on. They take the old man straight to the bodies, and he claimed that the bodies look so soft as if their bones have been crushed into pieces. Being unintentionally funny, the old man points out that the corpses are the opposite of soft because their privates are still erected. He asks the cadet and his superior about any female company around since all three of the men perished while having an erection which a woman might be responsible for. The cadet and his superior point fingers at Chu since she's the only woman in their camp. The old man asks them to take him to Chu's office. Outside the office, he strictly tells them to not come inside until he says so. He tells them that no matter how hard he screams or yells, the boys are not to barge in. Now, the old man goes inside and faces Chu, who's making very angry faces at him. Suddenly, the camp commander and the cadet hear him scream at the top of his lungs, but they don't go inside. The old man finally comes out with his ripped clothes and reveals that Chu has been possessed by the spirit of a female snake. She's here to take revenge on the commanders, who not only ate her boyfriend in the jungle, but brought his skin back to their camp. This explains the pattern of men the snake woman had targeted up till now. At first, the old man confronts having no methods to get rid of the spirit, since she's become 1,000 years old after devouring Insect. Soon, he recalls a methodology taught to him by the ancestors of his master, according to which they are going to need a virgin boy who can attract the spirit and enchant her. Once the spirit is enchanted, the virgin man is to put a sulfur grenade in her mouth to get rid of the spirit permanently. Following this, the men circle Desmond and prepare him to take one for the team and seduce the spirit. They take off Desmond's clothes and put on the snake skin over his shoulders, while Desmond awaits the spirit inside the room. The cadet plays a romantic song on tape outside the window. Soon, the spirit shows up shifting shapes. When she gets on top of Desmond, he sees a young seductive woman whereas the others see Chu. The old man asks the cadet to shout anything provocative to get Chu separated from the snake woman's control. The cadets start shouting about the arrival of the chief of the army for a spot check, and claim that they are going to report her behavior to him. Chu immediately snaps out of the charm and becomes humiliated to see what she is doing with Desmond. As she runs away covering her chest, the snake woman shows her true form and slithers on top of Desmond. The cadet throws the sulfur grenade at Desmond, but he fails to catch it. Despite being scared, he kisses the snake woman and requests to be on top of her. While he's at it, he gets his hand on the grenade and stuffs it inside the snake woman's mouth. After this, Desmond immediately runs out of the room before the grenade explodes. The scene cuts back to Tommy, whose website lags while he's composing the end of this story. Tommy hears his door being knocked constantly, so he goes out to check who is there at this hour. When he opens the door, he finds no one except for the smelly water that he finds on the floor. That night, he gets a text from Mia saying she wants to meet up with him near the reservoir. She also makes Tommy promise that he won't leave her when he finds out about her. Now, without a single thought, Tommy takes out his umbrella and walks his way to the reservoir on a rainy night. There, Mia texts him to come closer to the water. Tommy goes near the water but doesn't see anyone. While he thinks Mia's joking, a hand comes out of the water and pulls Tommy by his ankle. He tries to swim upward but he keeps drowning. He immediately opens his eyes and finds himself lying on his bed. However, he notices a bruise on his ankle, proving that he wasn't having a bad dream. As Tommy processes the reservoir event, he gets a text from Mia, in which she has written her address and asked him to come visit her. This time, Tommy takes out his car and goes to the exact address. He is happy to see Mia answering the door, but on the contrary, the girl claims she doesn't know him. When Tommy shows her the entire text conversation on his phone, The girl accuses him of being a pervert. With a worrisome face, she asks Tommy if he's a friend of Mindy Yoon, and also mentions not hurting Mindy intentionally. When she slams the door on Tommy's face, he realizes someone used this girl's picture and texted him on the horror site. On his way back, Tommy realizes Mia never existed, so he has a breakdown in the middle of the road. There, he searches Mindy on Google and finds out how she took her a few years ago because her friend Tiffany started bullying her online. Things escalated when others joined Tiffany in the cyberbullying. When Tommy sees Tiffany's profile picture, he realizes it's the same girl whom he had just met. At this realization, he gets a text from Mia's number, asking him to help her get inside Tiffany's house since she has a spell sheet hanging on her door. Suddenly, Tommy sees Mindy's ghost on his passenger's seat and becomes horrified, realizing he's been texting her the whole time. In the next scene, Tiffany is shown crying and regretting bullying Mindy on the internet. Suddenly, her computer gets bugged and her picture with Mindy pops up on the screen. On top of that, she sees Mindy's ghost behind the screen, which makes her turn on her lights and unplug the computer switch. She then hears a noise coming from her kitchen, so she goes outside the room. When she comes back, she finds Tommy sitting on her chair and scrolling Mindy's Facebook profile, which is loaded with comments from haters. When Tiffany comes closer, she sees Tommy's reflection in the mirror and realizes Mindy has taken possession of his body. She begins crying and apologizing to Mindy. Mindy forgives her in exchange for choking her lifeless and taking over her body. In the end, Tommy is seen returning to the army. His platoon is shocked to see him with Tiffany, who is there to drop him off. They realize Tommy was never lying about Mia, overwhelmed by the sight of him with a girl this hot, not knowing who she truly is.